Hey guys, in today's video I want to talk about the open-faced racket drop. Now I already made a video a long time ago titled open-faced versus on-edge racket drop. So in today's video I want to talk a little bit more in detail about the open-faced racket drop and how I discovered it. So when I did my serve research, I noticed that some of the greatest servers of all time, players such as Sampras, Federer, Racket, don't drop the racket on edge. This is a classic way of taking the racket back. Let me give you a quick recap of what some of the greatest players as well are doing, which is an on-edge racket drop. So players such as Serena Williams, John Isner, or Goran Ivanisevic will take their racket into the trophy phase, and now the racket will drop on edge. Now what happens shortly thereafter will depend on what type of serve they're attempting, but generally speaking, when the on-edge racket drop is occurring, the racket is dropping with a good distance from the body. So what happens on an on-edge racket drop serve is the racket will loop. If you take a look at my racket, it loops in and out of this position. It's like a looping motion. This is only present on some serves that are performed with the open-faced racket drop. So in other words, on any on-edge racket drop serve, you will see the racket coming in and out. Whether we talk about flat, slice, or kick, the racket will loop in this way. So what the open-faced racket drop is something that happens to many high-level players. So the racket will not loop, it will simply go straight back. That's why I named this the open-faced racket drop, because the first thing that happens shortly after the racket drop is that the racket face opens up towards the sky. Now some people have misconceptions about this movement of the racket. They're confusing this with a waiter serve, they're confusing this with an isolated movement of the arm. It is neither. What happens with these great servers such as Federer, Sampras, or Racket, and many others by the way, is when the racket is dropping, this is when the serve gets unloaded. So what happens is that the fact that the racket is dropping with an open face, this has no effect on the amount of drop we get. And it's that range of motion what a lot of recreational players struggle with. So whether the racket is going on edge and then dropping somewhere in here, usually you want to measure the correct length of a drop by where the tip of the racket is positioned. And it is at the high level always positioned below the lower back. So whether you're dropping the racket on edge or with an open face, this doesn't influence how low the racket drops. So the range of motion is not influenced by that whatsoever. Now when we're talking about the timing of the torso rotation, something very interesting happens on these two styles of racket drop. So whether we have an on-edge racket drop or an open-face racket drop, the initiation of the torso rotation happens when that elbow comes out. This is usually accompanied by the racket drop. So as soon as the racket starts to drop, this elbow starts to come out. So what happens on a serve with an on-edge racket drop is that even though we're getting the elbow out this way, the racket still loops behind. However, on an open-faced racket drop, because the racket is dropping this way, there is no loop. So in other words, the racket will drop straight down and then come around on this side and approach the ball forwards. Now interestingly, players with an open-faced racket drop, when they attempt a kick serve, for example, just think of Boris Becker or Roger Federer hitting a kick serve. Because there's less torso rotation on a kick serve, now the elbow doesn't come out right away. It stays on this side longer, and therefore the racket will not fall straight back. There will still be a small loop even with an open face racket drop. So take a look at a kick serve movement. The racket will be dropping on an open face, but with a small looping movement here. And on a flat serve, the elbow comes straight out and the racket will drop straight down. So you guys are probably thinking, what does this mean, Nick? Why are you giving these different racket drops these weird names? Well, I'm going to tell you, it doesn't mean anything. You shouldn't worry about this at all if you have a fundamentally correct serve. In other words, if your racket is dropping all the way down here at the recreational level, I usually look for the racket to drop towards the lower back area. At the high level, I do look for it to drop a little bit below the lower back. So if you have this, and also if you are controlling your torso rotation correctly on all your serves, and if the racket is approaching the ball forward and you're pronating into the contact, you got absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, a lot of the players that I analyze in my video analysis will be worried about this. They see themselves going like this and they say, hey Nick, do I have a waiter serve? And I say, absolutely not. If that's a waiter serve, then Pete Sampras, Boris Becker, and Roger Federer have a waiter serve as well. This is absolutely ridiculous. Those are some of the best serves in the history of the game. So if you have fundamental elements correct inside of this area of the serve, you shouldn't worry about how your racket is dropping at all. Now I'm going to add that players that have good fundamentals inside of this area of the serve that I just described are usually towards the higher recreational level. I get a lot of players with problems around the racket drop. So one common problem is an isolated movement of the arm. So if you're consciously dropping the racket, in other words, if you're doing this in an isolated movement, you're going to be doing it very slowly. So nothing else will be happening in the body, and you're going to be worried about how the racket is dropping, whether it's dropping on edge or with an open face. I don't want you to concern yourself with the racket drop at all, because if you're concerned about it, most likely you're going to do it very slowly in order to execute it correctly. And what happens then, you're going to be left with a serve that's lacking acceleration. Why? Because the serve is supposed to accelerate rapidly from the trophy position. Whether it's a position or a phase, once you reach this area of the serve, we have to accelerate very violently. If you're worried about how your racket is dropping, you're going to be doing this area of the serve very slowly, and your serve acceleration is going to suffer greatly because of it. So what you got to do is execute all the serve fundamentals correctly and accelerate with your entire body. All the power sources have to be there. And then with a lot of repetition, with a lot of time, this will not happen overnight, guys. This takes years. It would be easy to say, oh, I'm going to make a quick fix. I'm going to apply this instant improvement, and all of a sudden I'm serving like Pete Sampras and Roger Federer. Just think about that. That's likely not going to happen. You're going to have to put years of work into your serve, just like I did or any other high-level player, because this part right here is a high-level characteristics, and the only way you're going to get that is by doing a lot of repetition on your serve. You got to put in the hours if you want to have a high-level racket drop. So I already mentioned several times that it doesn't matter whether you're dropping with an open face or with an on-edge racket drop. What it does matter are some of the other mistakes that I see around this area. Some players will have the racket way too close to their head. This is a problem that I occasionally see at the high level as well. So players will get the racket over their head as they're dropping it. I'm sure you've seen players at your club doing this. And what happens is, with this type of serve, it is that you're guaranteed to have a more shallow racket drop. When the racket goes straight over your head and then back out, usually it flies at a circle this way. Yes, you will get a racket drop, but it will always be lower than a racket drop that occurs when the racket is dropping more behind the body like this or behind the body like this. In either case, there's a lot of space between your back and the racket. There's absolutely no high-level players that go straight over the head like this with the racket. There's always distance between the head and the racket, or the back and the racket, no matter what style of racket drop it is, in order to accelerate the racket at maximum speed and allow it to fall deeply into the racket drop. Also, something that Novak Djokovic struggled with early in his career is a position of the racket head too far away from the body where the arm is somewhat extended. This will hurt your racket drop as well. So when the arm is extended, when you drop the racket, the elbow can't come up quite as high, and now you have range of motion limitations because of it. So the absolute best way to position your racket is not going to be like this. It's not going to be like this. It's going to be somewhere in the middle with an angle of the arm. The racket should be slightly pointed forward. That's true, because what happens when you point the racket straight up, this puts a weird angle on your wrist. So the racket slightly pointing forward with a good distance between the racket and your head, and the arm in a comfortably bent position. And it does not matter at all how the racket drops. What matters is that it drops in conjunction with all the different power sources that are supposed to be unloaded in this phase of the serve. And what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the 4 power sources on the serve, which are swing momentum, vertical momentum, horizontal momentum, and forward momentum. Now, if you're more interested in finding out how this works in great detail, check out my video on that subject. So let me execute these 4 power sources in unison. Now guys, I have absolutely no idea how my racket dropped, and that is my point. If you concern yourself with the racket drop, whether you're trying to achieve the open face racket drop or the on edge racket drop, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. The fact that you're trying to do it will kill your serve, because you're going to do it very slowly. You're going to slow down this area of your serve, and you won't be able to unload like I just did. Now look, I completely understand that you are trying to make this happen consciously. You want to fix it consciously. You're concerned about it, but I'm here to tell you, is that don't concern yourself with it. Learn the fundamentals. There are so many fundamentals. It'll take you a lot of time to learn them. Go step by step. And what my research has shown and what my case studies on the court have shown is if you put in a lot of repetitions and all the fundamental elements are present, the racket will drop naturally very low, completely by itself without you being conscious of it. And the interesting thing about today's topic is that I only discovered this 3 years ago. So I spent my entire playing career having an open face racket drop without ever knowing about it.